The Ixiptlas. Don't think that they were an unknown tribute in the pre-Hispanic era. The reality is that this was a concept among Nahua groups. They spoke to us about the divinities literally living on earth, a concept we will explain in this video. The clash between the European and the pre-existing cultures was tremendous. Many things were not understood by one another. They invented and mixed things, giving rise to the syncretism that survives to this day. And well, who doesn't see Christ, virgins, saints, and holy deaths all over the country? Things that most people call images, where an image makes a religious belief more comprehensible. And well, the Spanish brought their images. And of course, they soon saw that there were also statues, drawings, and many things that they thought were also images. But in this clash of cultures, they encounter a word that they borrowed from Nahua groups for their benefit, applying it to the images of virgins and Christes they brought, which is Ixiptla. And wherever you go in front of the image of our Lord or His beloved ones, of course. This phrase refers to the Christian God, but in Nahuatl they assimilated the word Ixiptla. So, for the Spanish, Ixiptla and image were synonymous. But, as it almost always happens, the European's perspective fell very short of understanding the worldview that existed here. The concept of an image is very limited compared to that of an Ixiptla. And well, this word is one of the things that later got recorded somewhere, but very few people take it up. However, it was used in the animated series Onyx Equinox in its 11th episode called The Last Year, where a human in Tenochtitlan is named the Ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca. And well, this anime is to be commended to taking the trouble to talk about it. And why did this animation touch on this topic in their case? Ixiptla is a Nahuatl word that can have several possible translations, such as image, delegate, replacement, substitute, character, or representative. However, when analyzing its root, sheep, and its relationship with other words, concepts like the idea of skin, covering, or shell can be found. It is evident that this word entails something incarnated, a kind of container, something that is received, and obviously goes beyond a simple image as the Spanish perceived it. Now, returning to the Onyx Equinox animation, in that episode, which in my opinion was the only one worth watching, it talks about part of the ritual that begins with the selection of a young man who must meet certain requirements to be called the Ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca. As we have seen, we wouldn't have the common concept of calling him the image of Tezcatlipoca. However, it's curious that things like this still survive to this day. Let's take the example of the Christ of Iztapalapa. Every year a young man is selected, and they were chosen more than 500 years ago to represent something. In this case, anyone who wants to be the Christ of Iztapalapa must meet these requirements and behave in a certain way for a year to represent Jesus during Holy Week. The same thing happened in the past, as there were many Ixiptlas in their celebrations. However, not just anyone could be one of them, as the Christ of Iztapalapa had to meet certain requirements. and display certain behaviors. An Ixiptla was by no means just an actor in a play who plays a role and that's it. The Ixiptla went beyond that, making it more complex. The most famous Ixiptla, and perhaps that's why it was mentioned in the animated series, is the Ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca. The Ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca also appears represented in the Hernan series. In it, we see a young man who had to possess certain physical, athletic, and perhaps even spiritual characteristics to be an Ixiptla. This individual could be chosen from among captives, slaves, or even voluntary candidates. For a complete year, they would become Tezcatlipoca, with their skin serving as the cascara, or shell. Without delving into controversies about sacrifices, which can be explored in other videos, the version that speaks of the most famous Ixiptla is that after a year of being recognized as Tezcatlipoca, they would be sacrificed in the Toxcal ceremony. This Ixiptla was prepared and trained to be the embodiment of Tezcatlipoca. They live in luxury, but also walk the city with the facial paint and attire of the smoking mirror himself. They sung, were trained to play flute, and roamed the city, just as depicted in the model of the Tlatelolco market. In line with the deeper concepts of the word Ixiptla, this individual was the container of the Lord of the Smoking Mirror. It was as if his essence sought a physical vessel to reside in. To them, this was a real manifestation, and this person, who was obviously a human being, was seen as if he were Tezcatlipoca himself. His presence reminded them to deities' existence and power. Tezcatlipoca's Ixiptla was the most famous, but not the only one. For example, the four wives of Tezcatlipoca would also be Ixiptlas. These women were ordinary individuals who embodied Xochiquetzal, Xilonen, Atlatonan, and Huitzilopochtli. In the 111th offering found in the Great Temple, the remains of a young person were discovered, attired in clothing that archaeologists believe could represent an Ixiptla of Huitzilopochtli. This suggests there could be Ixiptlas for Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl, Xipetotec, and other deities. Who were seen as real divinities, natural powers, and mysterious beings incarnated before the entire community. Naturally, the humans who served as their vessels had to conduct themselves accordingly. Hence, this concept of the Ixiptla goes beyond the current representations of Christ during Holy Week. If you want even more complexity about the Ixiptlas, you should know that an Ixiptla could not only be a human being, as we've seen, but as a vessel, shell, face, skin, or receptacle of the divine. It could also be drawings in codices, carvings in stone, and many other things. This sets it apart from the Nahual. In both cases, we see transformations according to ancient beliefs, and while both speak of a kind of transformation, the appearance of the Nahual can only occur among living beings. This is the origin of the myths and legends of people transforming into wolves, owls, snakes, etc. Of course, it is assumed that the deities also have their Nahuales, such as Huitzilopochtli becoming a hummingbird, or Tezcatlipoca turning into a jaguar. However, in the case of Ixiptlas, divine energies or beings can enter objects like rocks or even amaranth. This is where we find another famous Ixiptla in the form of the amaranth figure of Huitzilopochtli. This object, obviously not a human, could still be considered an Ixiptla in their beliefs, as the god of war could enter this receptacle, something that some who can become a Nahual cannot do. As far as we know, a human cannot turn into amaranth. Therefore, the concept of Ixiptla encompasses more than that of the Nahual. These goddess images could be Ixiptlas, as could these monoliths, and a human as well. These natural forces could inhabit wherever they pleased. Upon entering, they would transform the animate or inanimate recipient into an Ixiptla, to be seen and revered.